Now it's kind of a super bummer that my dang messages go away every time, right? It would sure be nice if we could persist those across page refreshes. It'd also be nice if I could stay signed in when I'm signed in. Maybe we can make that happen pretty fast. That shouldn't be too complicated. What if we just like saved the user in local storage? How's that sound? All right, so handle auth sets the user in state. And how about it also just says local storage dot set item user, and that should be what? JSON dot stringify, right? User. And then we need to get it back out when it first loads. Huh. We need to do something when it first loads. Well, let's just check this much. All right. At a.com. Okay, I'm signed in now. So if I say local storage dot get item user, there it is. That worked. But if I refresh the page, it doesn't put it back in state, right? So now it's in local storage, but I need to get it from local storage and put it in state when the page first loads. So we need a way to do things when a component first loads. And there's a way to do that. We need lifecycle functions. So long ago, I said we can do stateless functional components under certain circumstances. That main circumstance is whether we need state, right? So if you don't need state, you can oftentimes do a stateless functional component. But that's not the only thing. That's not the only condition you have to meet. You can only do stateless functional components if you don't need lifecycle methods. Now, what the heck are lifecycle methods? They are methods that run automatically at certain points in a component's life. So when the component first loads, when the component unloads, when new props come in, when state changes, all those kinds of things. As long as you inherit from component, so as long as you're a class that's inheriting from a component, those things will run automatically at certain times, and so you can override them in your code, in your subclass, to make things happen. In the React docs, on just the page for components, components, state and lifecycle, right here. State and lifecycle. We know all about state now. We're pros at that. Converting a function to a class, adding local state to a class, adding lifecycle methods to a class. So there's special methods on the class that run when called lifecycle hooks. And this is not the main documentation for this. This is kind of like a tutorial page for it. So what if I just search for components? Here we go, components. Not the glossary, though. You know, I think they may have radically redone the React docs. I like the new ones. Here's lifecycle methods. Yes, okay, but I don't want the glossary. I don't want you to tell me about them. The component lifecycle. Here we go. Okay. So there's mounting. So you have certain methods that run both before and after the component is first added to the DOM. So it's added to the DOM when it renders, right? So you can make something that runs right before render or something that runs right after render. Similarly, you can do something that runs right before or after props or state change. Sometimes you need to do stuff like that. You can do something that runs right before or right after the component ceases to exist. it no longer is needed. So what we want to do is do something right when it first comes into existence. So I would say we could do right before it mounts. So by the time it actually tries to draw the page, we want it to have already loaded the user from local storage. Get it? So all of these lifecycle functions have did and will versions. So right before render is component will mount. Right after render is component did mount. So here's this page about the component lifecycle. And here's the other one that it super wanted me to use. State and lifecycle. Also good, just not the page I was looking for. So again, to do this, you have to be a class. And we are, so we're good. And then all you do is add a method with the right name. So component did mount. We don't need to do an arrow function. This is fine. Component did mount. Excuse me, will mount. I want it to do right before render. Because if I don't, it'll do the sign-in page real quick before it does main. Okay, so in component will mount, I want to get that user out of local storage. Local storage dot get item user. And we need to JSON parse that, right? Yeah. JSON parse. And if there was anything, we'll set state with that user. So just by naming this method component will mount, since we are inheriting from component, that will just override the one that's in the base class, and it'll run at the right time automatically, right before render. Let's refresh the page, and I go straight to main, because now it's loading that thing out of local storage. Now I have to make sure that I remove it from local storage when I sign out too, right? I can't just remove it from state now. So sign out sets state back to a blank user. And let's make sure we do local storage remove item. That's how you remove one. User. So I'm signed in. I'm signed out. I refresh. I'm still signed out. If I hadn't done that last part, I would be signed in again when I refreshed.
Are there brackets around user? Or?
Hmm?
Are there brackets around user?
When? No. That's just JavaScript. That's just the string user, because that's the key from local storage I'm removing. No React involved. So let's log back in and see the difference between component did mount and component will mount. So let's change this to component did mount, and it'll run right after render. And let's check that out. Okay, that is actually still fast enough. That's still fast enough. But will is better. It's probably very, very briefly trying to render sign in, but it happens so fast that we don't see it. But will mount is still the better choice. We want this to happen before it ever runs render. Questions about that? So now, when we're not signed in, we refresh the page. We're still not signed in. If we're signed in and we refresh the page, we're still signed in. Cool. Save user, how about that? Persist user in local storage. Fancy words. But what about our dang messages?